Back before phones and social media completely took over, kids actually spent most of their time outside. Maybe it's different now, or maybe it's just where I live. But I hardly ever see kids riding bikes around the neighborhood anymore, playing pranks, or getting into the kind of harmless trouble we used to find ourselves in. When I was growing up, though, anywhere from about 9 to 17 years old, I was outside almost every day with my friends. Just down the block from my childhood home was a small park that became our regular hangout spot, especially at night. Our parents hated how loud we could get, so the park was the perfect escape. It sat in a strangely isolated area, surrounded by patches of woods on 3 sides, with a street running along the 4th. Across that street was yet another wooded area. There were no nearby houses, no nosy neighbors peeking through curtains, and nobody calling the cops because a bunch of kids were being too loud after dark. This happened when I was around 13 years old, the age when bikes were basically our only form of transportation. If we wanted to go somewhere, we rode there. I think it was a Saturday. Earlier that day, a group of us had ridden to a nearby pizza place before ending up at my friend Wiley's house. The 7 of us were hanging out in his backyard until his mom finally came outside and yelled that we either needed to quiet down, send everyone home, or find somewhere else to be. 3 of our friends decided to call it a night. Me, Wiley, and our friend Rob weren't ready to go home yet, so we grabbed our bikes and headed to the park. The ride only took about 5 minutes. Even now, I remember how peaceful riding at night felt. The roads were quieter, the air felt cooler, and everything seemed calmer than it did during the day. The park itself wasn't very big. There was a small baseball field, a set of bleachers, a few benches, and a decent-sized playground with a swing set and one of those tall, twisting metal slides. We usually hung out on the playground because it was elevated and tucked away enough that we felt hidden from the rest of the world. For a while, we were just sitting there talking when Wiley suddenly stopped mid-conversation. "Did you hear that?" The 3 of us went silent. For several seconds, all I could hear was the distant hum of traffic and the wind moving through the trees. Nothing else. Wiley said he thought he had heard a footstep, or maybe some kind of thump, coming from the playground. At first, I wasn't sure what to think. It could have been anything. A branch falling, an animal. Maybe he imagined it. Still, all of us instinctively looked around. Nobody was there. A few minutes passed, and the conversation slowly started up again. Then we heard it. This time all 3 of us did. A dull thud echoed somewhere nearby. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough that we immediately stopped talking again. A strange feeling settled over me. Not outright fear yet, just that uncomfortable sensation that someone else was nearby watching us. We climbed down from the playground and searched around, checking behind the equipment and scanning the darker areas near the trees. "Who's there?" one of us called out. No answer. The silence that followed somehow felt worse. Eventually, feeling a little foolish, we climbed back onto the playground and tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. For a few more minutes, everything seemed normal. Then we heard a third sound, and this one instantly sent a chill through me. It was a voice, a child's voice. It came from inside the twisting metal slide. The moment we heard it, all 3 of us froze. I remember looking at Wiley and Rob and seeing the exact same confusion and fear on their faces that I felt. What made it so unsettling wasn't just the voice itself. It was the fact that none of us had seen anyone approach the playground. We hadn't heard anyone climbing up the structure, and those earlier thumping sounds hadn't seemed to come from the slide at all. For the first time that night, I genuinely felt scared. Part of me tried to come up with a rational explanation, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The park suddenly felt different. The darkness around us seemed heavier somehow, and the woods surrounding the playground felt closer than they had a few minutes earlier. Despite every instinct telling me not to, I slowly walked toward the slide. I remember my heart beating harder with every step. As I reached the opening, I leaned closer and listened, feeling strangely certain that whatever had made that sound knew I was standing there. Then I called out, "Is someone in there?" For a second, there was nothing. Then a voice answered. "Hello?" It was a child's voice. At least, that's what it sounded like. If I had to guess, I'd say it was a little boy, maybe a toddler. Even now, years later, I can't swear that's exactly what he said. But I'm about 90% sure it was hello. The important thing is that I wasn't the only one who heard it. Wiley and Rob heard it too. The three of us immediately looked at each other, and I could see the fear on their faces, because it matched exactly what I was feeling. We had been sitting on that playground for at least half an hour. Not once had we heard anyone climb up there. Not once had we seen a child running around. Trying to keep my voice steady, I crouched near the entrance of the slide and said, "Do you need help?" No response. The voice didn't answer. In fact, everything went completely silent again. At that point, the most logical explanation seemed obvious. I figured a little kid must have somehow gotten stuck inside the twisting slide. As strange as the situation felt, that explanation was still easier to believe than anything else. So I climbed into the slide myself. As I started sliding down, I fully expected to find a child waiting around the bend. My heart was racing, but I kept telling myself that was all this was. A lost kid. Nothing more. But when I reached the bottom, there was nobody there. The slide was empty. I immediately jumped off and checked around the playground. I looked under the equipment, around the benches, near the baseball field, and toward the tree line. Nothing. Not a single person. My friends came running over, just as confused as I was. And this is the part that still bothers me. There simply wasn't enough time for someone to disappear. If it had been a child, especially a toddler, we would have seen them. We would have heard them running away. The playground wasn't that big, yet somehow there was nobody. The longer we stood there searching, the more unsettled I became. It felt like the park itself had gone quiet, as if everything around us was waiting. Then we heard the voice again. This time it came from inside the slide once more. And this time it clearly said, "Catch me." The second those words reached us, every bit of bravery we thought we had vanished. We ran. None of us stopped to investigate. None of us tried to be rational. We sprinted to our bikes and pedaled harder than we ever had before. The entire ride back, I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind us or someone calling after us. We made it to my house in what felt like seconds. Once we got there, we hid out in my backyard, trying to catch our breath. We kept our voices low because my dad was probably asleep, and waking him up would have created a whole different problem. So the three of us sat there in the dark, replaying everything that had happened. Every sound, every possibility, every explanation. The more we talked about it, the less any of it made sense. Then came the knock. 3 sharp knocks against the backyard gate. All of us froze. The gate led to the side of the house, and nobody ever used it that late at night. Another knock. It sounded deliberate, like whoever was outside knew we were back there. I finally called out, "Who is it?" I expected a neighbor, maybe a family member. Instead, a woman's voice answered. "Hello?" There was something about her tone that instantly made me uneasy. Then she asked, "Were you boys at the park earlier?" The three of us exchanged nervous glances. There was a narrow crack between the gate and the fence, just wide enough to peek through. So I looked. And what I saw still unsettles me when I think about it. A middle-aged woman was standing on the other side. She wasn't moving. She wasn't looking around. She was staring directly at the crack. At me. And she was smiling. Not a friendly smile. Not a normal smile. A wide, unnatural grin that looked completely out of place. What disturbed me most was the feeling that she already knew I was looking through that gap before I even stepped up to it. As if she had been waiting for me. I immediately backed away from the gate. Every instinct told me not to keep looking at her. "No," I said. "Sorry." Then she asked again, "Are you sure?" Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. Before I could respond, Twiley quickly answered for me. "No, we weren't." A few seconds passed. Then the woman said, "Okay, thanks anyway." Her voice sounded perfectly calm, too calm. I cautiously stepped toward the gate again to see if she had left. She hadn't. She was still standing there, still smiling, still staring through the crack. At that point, we were completely done. We rushed inside through the back door and locked it behind us. For the next few hours, we stayed downstairs, shaken and trying to process what had happened. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe there always is. But none of the explanations ever felt right. My friends were so frightened that they refused to leave and ride home in the dark. They ended up sleeping over and heading home the next morning. We didn't go back to that park for a very long time. Years later, I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe there really was a child at the park. Maybe he ran off, and the woman was his mother looking for him. But the timeline doesn't work. We rode home almost immediately after hearing the voice. No one on foot could have followed us that quickly, especially without us noticing. And more importantly, none of us ever saw a child. Not before the voice, not after it, not anywhere. So what exactly spoke from inside that slide? Who was that woman? And why did it feel like she knew more than she should have? After all these years, I still don't have an answer. It's one of those memories that has faded around the edges, but never completely disappeared. A mystery that, as far as I'm concerned, will probably never be solved. This happened less than 24 hours ago, and even now I can replay every second of it in my head. The details are still crystal clear. Honestly, I'm not even sure how to categorize this story because it was so strange and unsettling. What I do know is that it was the only time in my life that I've genuinely felt like I might be in serious danger. It started out as a completely normal night. 5 friends and I had decided to meet up at a popular public park in our area known as the Overlook. It's a local spot famous for its view of downtown and the nearby university campuses. People hang out there all the time, especially on warm nights. It was around 11 p.m. The plan was simple. Sit around, talk, and kill some time. Nothing more. We were all relaxed and in good spirits. At some point, one of my friends mentioned that he had a few Roman candles in the trunk of his car and suggested we set them off. The Overlook itself would have been a terrible place for fireworks. It was far too open, and anyone nearby would immediately see what we were doing. So I suggested we head to another section of the park called the Loop. The Loop was only a few minutes away and was much more secluded. Most of it was surrounded by dense woods, making it difficult for anyone outside the area to see inside. It seemed like the perfect spot. Looking back now, I wish we had just gone home. The 6 of us split between 2 cars and drove over. Even though there was plenty of parking inside the Loop itself, we decided to leave our cars on a nearby street just in case something went wrong, and we needed to leave quickly. At the time, it felt like a harmless precaution. Now it feels strangely fortunate. We started walking toward the cul-de-sac area that made up the Loop. The road leading into it was long and winding, cutting through thick woods on both sides. The trees formed a wall of darkness that blocked almost everything from view. Once you entered that area, it felt isolated from the rest of the park. As we walked, we noticed a few vehicles parked in different spots. That wasn't entirely unusual. People walked there late at night all the time. Still, something about it felt slightly off. There seemed to be more cars than I expected for that hour. I remember noticing it, but immediately dismissing the thought. A few minutes later, we reached the actual Loop. That's when things started getting strange. Several vehicles were parked around the cul-de-sac. None of them had their lights on. The area was eerily quiet. Then, without warning, a truck behind us began moving. Its headlights were off. At first, it was facing toward the entrance of the Loop, away from us. Then, it suddenly made a U-turn and started driving in our direction. I remember exchanging glances with my friends. Nobody said anything at first, but we were all thinking the same thing. Why was it moving now? Something about the way it was creeping forward made my stomach tighten. Instinctively, we stepped behind a few trees and watched. The truck rolled past us slowly, too slowly. Then it continued around the Loop, headed back toward the entrance, stopped abruptly, and made another U-turn. The second it turned around again, I felt my stomach drop. Whatever it was doing didn't feel normal. The truck wasn't large. Maybe it could fit 2 or 3 people comfortably. There were 6 of us, all grown men, most over 6 feet tall. Logically, we should have felt safe. But logic wasn't helping. Something about the situation felt wrong. Then one of my friends made what was probably the worst possible decision. Without warning, he lit one of the Roman candles. A burst of sparks shot into the night sky. For a split second, everything around us lit up. And immediately, the truck reacted. Its headlights snapped on, the engine roared, and it started moving directly toward us. Every casual thought I had disappeared. Fear took over instantly. We bolted. I remember hearing people yell, branches snapping beneath our feet, my heart pounding so hard it felt painful. We ran off the pavement and into the tree line. The ground dropped into a steep wooded slope covered in thick brush and tall grass. This wasn't a hiking trail. Nobody was supposed to be running through this area. The vegetation clawed at our legs and slowed us down, but adrenaline kept us moving. Then I heard something that made the situation feel even worse. The truck's horn, long, aggressive, constant. And then more headlights appeared. Several sets. Lights that hadn't been on before suddenly flickered to life around the Loop. And I remember thinking that there were far more people there than we originally realized. That realization terrified me. Because if those vehicles were connected somehow, we had no idea what we had just stumbled into. During the chaos, our group became separated. I ended up with 2 of my friends. The other 3 had vanished somewhere in the darkness. For a moment, I considered trying to find them. Then another thought hit me. What if someone was actively chasing us? That became my only concern. Suddenly, we heard doors slam. Voices, shouting, then flashlights. 2 men jumped out of the truck and started running down into the woods, toward us. I still remember the feeling that hit me when I saw those flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Pure panic, not nervousness, not anxiety. Panic. The kind that strips away every other thought except survival. My friends and I immediately dropped to the ground. We pressed ourselves into the brush and tried not to move. Tangled branches scratched against my face. Leaves covered my clothes. I remember forcing myself to breathe slowly, even though my chest felt ready to explode. The flashlight beams moved through the trees, getting closer, sweeping back and forth. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely believed that if those men found us, something very bad was going to happen. I managed to squeeze myself beneath a large bush, pressing my body as close to the ground as possible. The branches scratched against my arms and face, but I didn't care. My 2 friends weren't as lucky. They found cover nearby, but parts of their bodies were still exposed. From where I was hiding, I could see enough of them to know that if someone shined a flashlight in the right direction, we'd be caught immediately. The 3 of us had ended up in a shallow depression in the woods, almost like a natural ditch. Above us was a part of the loop, elevated just enough that anyone standing there could potentially look down into our hiding spot. For several minutes, everything went quiet. No voices, no engines, nothing. The silence was somehow worse than the chase. Every small sound felt amplified. My heartbeat sounded deafening in my ears. Then we heard footsteps. Flashlights appeared above us. The beams swept slowly through the trees. My stomach dropped. I remember holding my breath and thinking, they have to see us. But somehow they didn't. Or at least, I don't think they did. To this day, I'm not entirely sure. The flashlights lingered in the area long enough that it felt impossible for us to remain unnoticed. Yet nobody approached. Nobody called out. Nobody came down toward us. Still, we felt trapped. It seemed like one group was searching below, while another remained above, covering the area from different angles. The whole situation made absolutely no sense. We couldn't understand why anyone would react this way over a few fireworks. Nobody's vehicle had been damaged. We hadn't approached anyone, and fireworks were completely legal in our state. The more I thought about it, the less it added up. At some point, I stopped trying to make sense of it. Survival became the only thing that mattered. All we could do was stay hidden and hope they eventually gave up. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably around 15 minutes, we saw the truck finally back out of the grass and return to the road. Moments later, it drove away. One by one, the other headlights disappeared too. A wave of relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. Something still bothered me. We never saw the men who had entered the woods come back out, not once. That realization brought the fear rushing right back. What if they were still out there? What if they were waiting for us to move? Before we could even discuss it, one of my friends suddenly realized something. His phone was gone. Somewhere during the sprint into the woods, he had dropped it. At first, I thought there was no chance we'd ever find it. Surprisingly, locating it wasn't the hard part. Getting out of the woods afterward was. The entire area was pitch black. The tree canopy blocked most of the moonlight, and we were terrified to use our phones or flashlights. Any light could reveal exactly where we were. So we stumbled through the darkness, almost blindly. Every snapped twig made us freeze. Every rustle in the brush sounded like someone approaching. Eventually, we regrouped with another friend who had been hiding nearby the entire time. He looked just as shaken as we felt. Then he told us something that made my blood run cold. One of the men had run right past his hiding spot, close enough that he could hear him breathing. But somehow, the man never saw him. At first, that was terrifying enough. Then my friend added one more detail. The man appeared to be carrying something, not a flashlight, not a phone, something metallic. He thought it looked like a knife or some other melee weapon. Hearing that changed everything. Up until then, part of me had still been searching for a rational explanation. Maybe they were security. Maybe angry locals. Maybe people protecting private property. But if someone was genuinely carrying a weapon while chasing strangers through the woods in the middle of the night, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. We immediately decided it was time to leave. No more hiding, no more waiting. Just run. We sprinted down the road toward the entrance of the loop. Every second felt critical. Then we saw it. The truck. The exact same truck from earlier. It was parked roughly 50 feet from the exit. The moment I recognized it, my heart sank. For a second, it felt like all our efforts had been pointless. Like they had anticipated exactly where we'd try to escape. Fortunately, there was a thick patch of woods running alongside part of the road. We slipped into it and tried to move quietly toward the exit. For a brief moment, I thought it might work. Then the truck's headlights exploded to life. The high beams lit up the woods around us. I still don't know how they knew we were there. Maybe they heard us. Maybe they saw movement. Maybe it was just bad luck. Whatever the reason, they reacted instantly. The truck pulled toward the edge of the woods. That was all the motivation we needed. We ran, not jogged, not hurried, ran. Branches whipped across our faces. Roots nearly tripped us. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were going to give out. But none of us slowed down. The truck followed along the road beside us. I could hear the engine moving through the darkness. At one point, I genuinely thought they were going to cut us off. Fortunately, we pushed deeper into the woods, where the vehicle couldn't follow. Eventually, we reached a larger road leading away from the loop. Only then did the truck stop pursuing us. It never came beyond the entrance. That fact still confuses me. If they were simply angry about the fireworks, why chase us so aggressively? If they wanted to scare us, why continue after we had already run? And if they had some other reason, I honestly don't want to know. We took separate back roads to return to our cars, constantly checking behind us to make sure nobody was following. Even then, I didn't feel safe. Not until I was finally back home. We didn't hear from our other friends until hours later. Thankfully, they were okay. Unlike us, they hadn't stopped to hide. They simply ran as fast as they could and managed to escape much earlier. Looking back, that may have been the smarter choice. I know one thing for certain. I will never go back to the loop. Not during the day. Not at night. Not ever. I don't know who those people were. I don't know what they were doing out there. And I don't know why they seemed so determined to find us. Maybe there is a reasonable explanation. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that during those moments hiding in the woods, listening to footsteps and watching flashlight beams sweep through the darkness, I genuinely believed something terrible was about to happen. I've experienced fear before, but nothing compares to that night. For those few hours, I truly had no idea whether we were going to make it out safely. And that's a feeling I'll never forget. I never thought a normal walk through the park could turn into one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I live in a small suburban town, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and everyone seems to know everyone else's name. It's the sort of town where you grow up believing you're safe almost everywhere you go. That's probably why I didn't pay attention to the warning signs sooner. It was a Friday night in the summer of 2019. I had just finished a late shift at work and felt mentally exhausted. Instead of going straight home, I decided to take a walk through the local park to clear my head. It was only a few blocks from my apartment, and I often went there when I needed some quiet time. The sun had set about an hour earlier. The park lights were on, casting soft pools of yellow light along the walking paths. But most of the trail still disappeared beneath the shadows of the trees. As I entered the park, I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the warm night air. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and a light breeze rustled the leaves overhead. It was the kind of calm atmosphere that usually helped me relax after a stressful day. I wasn't expecting many people to be there. On most weekday nights, I'd either have the park to myself or pass a few dog walkers and the occasional group of teenagers hanging around near the benches. I slipped my headphones in, keeping the music low enough to hear what was happening around me, and started along the main path. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. A couple of dogs chased each other across an open field. Somewhere ahead, I heard a group of people laughing quietly. The whole scene felt ordinary and comforting. Then, I noticed something that made me slightly uneasy. A man was sitting alone on a bench beside the path. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head, despite the warm summer weather. At first, I barely thought about it. People sit on park benches all the time. But as I got closer, I realized he was staring at me. Not glancing, not casually looking around, staring. His head remained perfectly still as I walked past. He didn't check his phone, didn't look away. His eyes seemed locked on me the entire time. A small wave of discomfort crept through me. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just daydreaming. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, I found myself walking a little faster. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't immediately turn around. At first, I assumed it was another person using the trail. But something about the rhythm caught my attention. The footsteps seemed unusually close. I slowed down. The footsteps stopped. A chill ran through me. I stood there for several seconds, listening. Nothing. The park suddenly felt much quieter than before. I started walking again. A moment later, the footsteps returned. Same pace, same distance. This time my stomach tightened. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone else was walking in the same direction. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But the timing felt too precise, too deliberate. Every time I adjusted my pace, the footsteps seemed to adjust with me. Trying to shake the feeling, I turned onto a smaller side trail that cut through a darker section of the park. It wasn't my usual route, but it would eventually loop back toward the street near my apartment. Part of me hoped whoever was behind me would continue straight. Instead, I heard the footsteps follow. I glanced over my shoulder. That's when I saw him, the man from the bench, He had gotten up, and he was walking the same path. For a moment, I convinced myself it could still be a coincidence. People use the trails all the time. Maybe he simply happened to be heading the same way. But the longer I watched him, the less convinced I became. There was something strange about the way he moved. He wasn't walking normally. He wasn't exercising. He wasn't looking around at the scenery. He seemed focused, intentional, almost as if he was carefully matching my pace while pretending not to. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Then I raised it to my ear and pretended to be on a call. A normal person might have reacted. They might have looked away, changed direction, shown some sign that they realized they were making someone uncomfortable. He did none of those things. If anything, his behavior became even more unsettling because of how little he reacted. It was as though he didn't care that I had noticed him. That realization made my pulse quicken. I forced myself to stay calm and kept walking. Maybe if I picked up the pace, he'd fall behind. Maybe I'd finally convinced myself I was overthinking everything. I broke into a light jog. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps quicken too. When I glanced back again, my heart nearly stopped. He was jogging now, not gaining on me, not falling behind, keeping exactly the same distance. And for the first time that night, I stopped wondering if I was imagining things. Because deep down, I had the unmistakable feeling that this man wasn't simply walking through the park. I felt like he was following me. My mind was racing. Why was he following me? Was he actually dangerous? Or was I overreacting? Should I turn around and go back the way I came? 100 possibilities flashed through my head, but none of them made me feel any better. I decided I needed to get out of the park. There was a street exit just ahead that led back toward a well-lit neighborhood. If I could make it there, I'd at least be around other people. I broke into a run. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. Every breath felt shallow. Every sound behind me seemed amplified. Then I heard the footsteps. They sped up too. Not faster than me, not slower. Exactly matching my pace. That was the moment panic really set in. I didn't dare look back again. Some part of me was afraid of what I'd see if I did. Instead, I focused on the streetlights ahead and ran as fast as I could. When I finally reached the edge of the park and stepped onto the sidewalk, I slowed down and risked a glance over my shoulder. The man had stopped. He stood just inside the tree line, half hidden by shadows. I could still see the hood pulled over his head and the outline of his figure against the dim path behind him. He wasn't moving. He wasn't leaving. He was just standing there, watching me. Even now, years later, that image is burned into my memory. I don't know how long I stood frozen on that sidewalk before survival instinct finally took over, and I ran the rest of the way home. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to get my key into the lock. Once I was inside, I locked the door immediately and checked every window. I kept expecting to see him outside, but I never did. Eventually, I convinced myself that was the end of it. Maybe he was just a strange guy. Maybe he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. Maybe he was harmless. I kept searching for explanations because the alternative was something I didn't want to think about. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he simply happened to be walking in the same direction. Anything felt better than admitting how frightened I really was. For the next few days, I tried to return to normal life, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The image of him standing motionless in the shadows kept replaying in my head. A few days later, I decided to return to the park during daylight hours. Part of me wanted to prove to myself that I was being irrational. The park looked completely different during the day. Families were out walking. Kids were playing. People sat on benches enjoying the weather. Everything appeared normal. Slowly, I began to relax. Then I noticed the bench. The same bench where I had first seen him sitting. It was empty now. As I walked past, something carved into the wood caught my attention. I stopped. Someone had scratched letters into the surface. The markings looked rushed and uneven, as though whoever made them hadn't wanted the words to be easily read. Some letters were deep, others were smeared and distorted. I stared at them for several seconds, trying to figure out what they said. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just vandalism. But for some reason, a knot formed in my stomach. The sight of it felt wrong. I quickly took a picture and continued walking. The entire way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the carving meant something. After that, I avoided the park at night altogether. But the strangest part wasn't the fear. It was the feeling that lingered afterward. The feeling that someone knew I had been there, that someone had noticed me, that someone might still be watching. I began noticing things I normally would have ignored. A shadow disappearing from the corner of my eye. A figure across the street that seemed to vanish when I looked directly at it. An unfamiliar car parked down the block for several days. Lights switching on in houses as I passed. Looking back, I honestly don't know how much of it was real. Maybe none of it was. Maybe fear had made me hyper-aware of everything around me. I kept telling myself exactly that. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the uneasy feeling never completely disappeared. Then, about 2 weeks later, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I had gone for an early evening jog. Not at night, not even close. I deliberately stayed away from the park and stuck to the main roads. I thought that was enough. As I passed the edge of the park, I glanced toward the trees, then froze. There was someone standing there, just inside the tree line, barely visible. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I saw the hood. My stomach dropped instantly. The figure was the same height, the same build, the same motionless posture. Everything about him reminded me of the man from that night. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't step forward. He simply stood there, watching. I can't explain why, but I had the overwhelming feeling that he had been standing there for a long time before I noticed him. As if he'd been waiting. As if he knew I'd eventually pass by. My instincts screamed at me to run. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. I kept moving at a steady pace, refusing to take my eyes off him. The closer I got to my car, the more vulnerable I felt. The distance seemed to stretch forever. Finally, I reached the driver's door. I got inside as quickly as possible, locked the doors, and immediately started the engine. As I drove away, I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror. Part of me expected to see him step out from the trees. Part of me expected him to be gone entirely. But by the time I looked back again, I couldn't see him anymore. And somehow, that felt even worse. I never saw him again after that. At least, not for certain. But every now and then, when I'm walking alone at night or passing a quiet street, I get that same feeling. The feeling that someone is standing just beyond my line of sight, watching, waiting. And every time it happens, my mind goes back to that park and the hooded figure standing silently among the trees. To this day, I still don't know whether he was a real threat, an incredibly strange coincidence, or simply a fear that grew larger in my memory over time. What I do know is that I've never walked through that park alone after dark again. Over the years, I've tried to find a logical explanation for what happened. At one point, I even looked into the park's security cameras. I was hoping there would be something, anything, that could explain what I saw that night. There wasn't. According to the footage, nobody unusual entered the park around that time. The sections of the trail where I had walked were supposed to be covered by cameras, yet nothing stood out. No hooded man, no suspicious figure, nothing. I remember staring at the footage and feeling more unsettled than relieved. Part of me wondered if he somehow knew where the cameras were and avoided them. Another part wondered if he had been living somewhere nearby, hidden well enough that nobody ever noticed him. But honestly, I have no idea. The truth is, I never actually learned anything about him. I never heard his voice. He never spoke to me. He never approached me directly. Other than those footsteps matching mine in the darkness, there was almost no interaction at all. Just a presence, a feeling. And somehow that made it worse. I've told friends and family about the experience over the years. Most of them politely nod and then suggest I was probably imagining things. Stress, exhaustion, paranoia, a misunderstanding. Maybe they're right. I've considered all of those possibilities myself. But there's still a part of me that remembers exactly how I felt that night. The certainty that I wasn't alone. The certainty that someone was deliberately following me. And that's the part I can't explain. To this day, I avoid that park after dark. Even during the daytime, I usually stay on the main streets and keep moving. I don't linger there anymore. The strange thing is that the fear itself eventually faded. What remained was the memory. Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I find myself thinking about that tree line where he stood. I picture that motionless figure in the shadows, and I can't help wondering if he's still there. Not necessarily waiting for me, maybe waiting for someone else. I know how irrational that sounds. A part of me knows it's probably impossible. Years have passed. People move on. Lives change. But fear doesn't always follow logic. Sometimes it stays frozen in a single moment. For me, that moment is still standing at the edge of that park, looking back and seeing him watching from the darkness. Never reported the incident to the police. At the time, I considered it. But what would I have told them? I had no evidence, no photograph, no clear description. I couldn't even confidently describe his face. All I really had was a dark hoodie, a vague silhouette, and an overwhelming feeling that he knew exactly where I was at all times. The uncertainty is what haunts me most. Not knowing who he was, not knowing what he wanted, not knowing whether I was ever truly in danger, or whether I narrowly avoided something far worse. Even now, years later, I still feel uneasy whenever I pass that area. Sometimes when I'm driving by, I catch myself glancing toward the trees. Every now and then, I think I see a figure standing there, a dark shape near the edge of the woods. Usually when I look again, it's gone. Maybe it was never there at all. Maybe it's just my imagination filling in the blanks. I've never stopped long enough to find out. I always keep driving. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I still go for walks. I still enjoy being outside. But I make sure I'm never alone in that park after dark. And every so often, when I'm lying awake at night, I hear footsteps somewhere outside. Distant. Faint. Probably belonging to a neighbor or someone passing by. That's what I tell myself anyway. And most nights, I believe it. But there are other nights when that old feeling returns. The same feeling I had in the park. The feeling that someone is just beyond sight. Watching. Waiting. Following. Maybe it's nothing. I sincerely hope it is. But after all these years, I still can't completely shake the thought that somewhere out there, the man in the hoodie never really left. And that's why this is a memory I'll never forget.